Welcome to another edition of our treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled Justice, Judges, and Priests, and it's taken from Deuteronomy, the 16th chapter, verses 18 through 20, and then Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 through 13. And it's for January the 23rd, 2022, winter quarter, lesson number 8. Now, a little background information. Today's lesson deals with the setup of the judges and the rulers of the people of Israel. Now, Israel was a very unique country. It was the only true theocracy that has ever been in existence. And why I say the only true one is because God actually instituted this theocracy. But what do I mean by theocracy? What I mean is that there is the combination of both the spiritual and the natural being governed by the same group, the same mechanism. And God redeemed the people of Israel, got them out of Egypt's bondage, took them to the land of Canaan, set up the priests, set up the judges, set up the rulers, set up everything, gave them the natural laws that they were to live by, and everything was underneath that one entity. The combination of church and state. Now, every other time period of human history, there is a difference between the church and the state. In other words, the way we are now in the United States, we have the church has got its place and the state has got its place. And with the exception of when God actually set up and gave out the rules and set up the mechanism for that combination of politics, governing, and spiritual matters, with the exception of that time when God set it up, every time man has tried to set up a combination religion, government, it has always failed. We end up with the people taking over the churches only because they want political power. We end up with horrible situations occurring where there are catastrophes and persecutions of various groups. You look through the church, the history of the Catholic Church, when the Catholic Church would have governmental authority and was ruling both the church and the government, they would end up having it like the Inquisition. And then when Protestants, when they took control over the governments, they would do things like having massacres occurring. And it just doesn't work. There's a place for the church, there's a place for the state. And you look through the entire New Testament, the entire New Testament, and you do not find one place, not once in the entire New Testament, where Jesus or the apostles or the disciples tried to change the political environment of their day. They absolutely did not do it. There's not one instance. Now, there are instances where they had to interact with the governmental officials, but every single time that they were interacting with the governmental officials, it was because they were under charges, because they were preaching the gospel, and they were actually asserting their right to preach the gospel and to tell people the truth. And that's it. Okay? But now, under the time period, from the time that that Moses, God led Moses to go get the people of Israel, and the time between that time and the beginning of the church age, there was a theocracy in Israel. Okay? And so the rules that and the things that some of the things we're going to be talking about today are going to be those theocratic situation, where uniquely at this time period, God had set up by his decree this theocratic government that was both a combination of the worship of the Jews and the government of the Jews. Okay. Now, Deuteronomy 16 and 18. Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall judge the people fairly. So here God was telling them to set these governmental officials up, and these officials had the mandate, they had the requirement to judge the people fairly. And that's fairly regardless of their income, fairly regardless of who they're kin to, fairly for how pretty they were, how ugly they were. Everybody was to be judged fairly by these judges. And notice that there were judges set at the local level. And that's one thing that we need in churches, is that we need people at the local level. It doesn't do you much good if you have no interaction with a pastor and a deacon board that are 1,000 miles away, that you never talk with, you never interact with. You need somebody there close that knows you, knows what you look like, knows the sound of your voice, knows how many kids you have, knows who you're married to, knows where you work at, so they can minister to you. Okay? Deuteronomy 16, 19, and 20. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent. Follow justice, and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you. Now, even though we are not in theocratic times, and even though we have separation of church and state, the concept of justice and doing the right thing still holds true. Christians should be very, very concerned with justice. Things should be fair. We should never let gain or the promise of gain or the potential of gain to change what we know to be fair. Okay? Deuteronomy 17:8-9. If cases come before your courts that are too difficult for you to judge, whether bloodshed, lawsuits, or assaults, take them to the place the Lord your God will choose. Go to the Levitical priest and to the judge who is in office at that time. Inquire of them, and they will give you the verdict. So notice here that these individual local judges were not doing things at their sole discretion. They were people above them that they could go to when things were hard to judge and they needed to get more references. They needed to get advice. They needed to seek wisdom. And it's important for us to have that kind of situation inside our churches. You know, a situation comes up, the local pastor doesn't know what to do. He needs to have somebody above him to go to and to check and to get some advice. And even those people they need to have somebody to go to help advise them of what the situation is. Okay? Now, Deuteronomy 17:10-11. You must act according to the decisions they give you at the place the Lord will choose. Be careful to do everything they instruct you to do. Act according to whatever they teach you and the decisions they give you. Do not turn aside from what they tell you to the right or to the left. Now here, God through Moses is instructing the people to be obedient to the people who have authority over them. Now that includes teachers in a classroom. That includes parents. That includes grandparents. That includes police officers. That includes mayors of cities. That includes governors of states. That includes presidents of countries. We should be obedient and mindful to do what we are supposed to do, what we're being told to do. We are to be mindful to obey to the best of our ability. That includes the deacon boards and the pastors and the presbyters and the general overseers and such as that. People who are over you, you need to be obedient as much as you possibly can. Now, notice that I said as much as you possibly can. They are those rare instances, and these are very rare times, where someone over you tells you to do something that is morally wrong and against God's word, and you have to be disobedient under that situation. But those are very, very, very few and far in between. You'll notice the number of times that Paul told people to obey the rulers over them. And this is even though Paul had to practice civil disobedience a few times, where he was told not to preach, and he had to go ahead and preach anyway. Okay? But the times that you're going to be asked to do things that are wrong are very few times. And you should make every effort to see the rationale behind doing the right thing. And even if you don't particularly agree with what you're being told to do by the people in charge, unless there is a clear instruction from God, you need to go ahead and do it. Okay? Now, Deuteronomy 17, 12, and 13. Anyone who shows contempt for the judge or for the priest who stands ministering there and to the Lord your God is to be put to death. You must purge the evil from Israel. All the people will hear and be afraid and will not be contemptuous again. So we see a continue of something similar to what Paul was saying, is that the people in charge don't bear the sword in vain. There are consequences for being disobedient. And there should be consequences for being disobedient. Okay? Now, concluding thoughts. As much as you possibly can, try to do your civic obligations in the society that you're in. And if God calls you to be a police officer, God bless you, go be a police officer. God calls you to run for mayor of your city, God bless you, go run for being mayor. If it's your calling to run for governor, go run, be a governor. Rule the way God would have you to rule, by being just and fair. And if your place in life is not to do those things and just do something, God calls you to do something else, as much as you possibly can, obey the people who are over you. Do your civic duty. Pay your taxes. When you're called up for jury duty, do that. Don't let down on what you're obligated to do. Christians should be very, very, very civic-minded in the communities that we live in. We should volunteer at the local library, volunteer at the local parks department. We should always be real honest about paying our taxes. We should always go for jury duty every time we're called up for it. We should serve in militaries and be policemen and be firemen and do whatever we can to make the society around us a lot better. Okay? Well, friends, good Lord willing, I'll be back with you next weekend.